Welcome inside the Dynasty War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we are back today for episode 8 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. And today we're going to talk trades. So everyone, that's everyone's favorite part of the off season, and we've had a lot of trades go down across all the leagues that I'm in. So we're going to talk about some of those today, review them, talk a little bit of strategy and tips for making those trades happen, and see how we think things turned out for all these teams involved making moves right here before the NFL draft. So I've got 8 trades across a number of different leagues that we're going to talk about. But before we jump into that, I just want to remind everyone, go and follow us on Twitter at Dynasty War Room. Follow us or subscribe to the show on YouTube at Dynasty War Room. You can find this show on any streaming platform that you would typically listen to a podcast on. We're on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, you name it, we're probably there. So go ahead and follow us on whatever platform of your choice, so you don't miss any episodes in the future. You can always go back and catch any of our old episodes there as well. And we appreciate you all tuning in and hanging out, talking some fantasy football. So we're just going to jump into things. This hopefully won't be a long episode because next week we are going to start. We're going to jump into our position previews for rookies as we lead into the NFL draft, which will be here in Detroit. So stay tuned. We're going to have a bunch of rookie content coming. We just got to dive into a little bit more film. Want to make sure that we're fully prepped and ready to go for those episodes. But for now, let's talk some trades. So we'll do some trade review. We're going to start with a simple trade, which is one of my favorite types of trades. Those small, third-round pick for a player that you think can help your team out. I'm a big fan of these types of moves, and that's what this first trade is. So it is Raheem Mostert for the 306. So for context, how we're going to break this down, I'm going to let you know, what side is a contender or a rebuilding team. Just try to give you a little bit of context and background, because one thing that is all too common in the Dynasty community is, we just talk about the trade itself in a vacuum without taking into consideration the surrounding circumstances, which are critical in Dynasty fantasy football, because whether you're rebuilding, whether you're a contender, whether you are really thin depth-wise at a certain position, that makes a ton of difference. What kind of draft capital you have if you're going to move or acquire picks. So for this trade, Raheem Mostert, the team that acquired him is a contender that was very weak at running back. They really didn't have much depth there, and I think it's a team that was kind of a fringe playoff team last year and is now starting to move forward a bit and trying to make its way into that top 3 in the league. They had some draft capital. They had they still have 2 first-round picks. They had 2 thirds. And so they moved one of them to acquire Raheem Mostert, who, an older running back, but had a career year last year with Miami. Certainly, if he has another season anywhere close to what he did last season, will be more than worth the 306. The team that gave Mostert up is also a contender. So this is a contender and contender trade, which doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes they can work out to be, best for both teams. And here, this team was loaded at running back. They had 4 or 5 other guys. They can easily slide right into that starting lineup. You had no first-round picks, no second-round picks. Just had a couple late-round picks. So adding a 306, it becomes this team's highest draft pick, is 2 thirds and 2 fourths. And like I said, it's just kind of one of those things where this could be nice for both sides. There's some obvious risk with Raheem Mostert, age, injury history, the fact that Devon Achane is, hopefully will be back and healthy. And there's always a threat that Miami could draft another running back. Because again, one thing that we have talked about over and over and over on this show is this is not the time of year that we buy running backs. So now in this sense, I don't think it was an overpay by any means. Frankly, it's probably a little bit of an underpay. I think, the 301, 302, something like that would make sense for Mostert. But all things considered, I think it works out pretty well for both sides here because I don't expect Mostert to be, a top 10 running back next year in fantasy, probably not even a top 20 running back. I think we're talking, he probably falls back to more of a, RB3 type of player, which is fine. And for a mid-third round pick, no issues there for either side. And these are the type of moves, too, that, you're just filling in, some depth, getting an extra player to slide into your starting lineup without giving a lot up. If Mostert does crash and burn and he doesn't work out, it's not going to be the end of the world for the team that acquired him in this deal because he's only giving up a mid-third round pick. This isn't something where you're trading a whole big haul for one of those top-end running backs just to, see that team draft somebody next month in the draft. So that's not the case. Low risk for both sides, and I love those types of moves. And next up, we have a trade involving quarterbacks. We actually have a lot of different trades that we're going to talk about on this show that are quarterback focused. This will be the first, and it probably involves the highest end quarterback in this deal. I will also tell you that this is the only trade of these 8 that I am personally involved in. I was the team that acquired the quarterback in this trade here, so all the rest of these trades are moves within my leagues that do not involve my team. But this one does, and I acquired Jalen Hurts. I am a contending team. I have Dak Prescott is my only other quarterback of relevance on my roster, and I acquired Jalen Hurts, and I gave up the 201, my 25 first-round pick, my 2025 second-round pick, and my 2026 second-round pick. So 3 second-round picks and 1 first-round pick for Jalen Hurts. The team that acquired all those picks is a rebuilding team that is starting a complete tear down. This was kind of the first big rebuilding move for this team. They already had the 107 and the 209, so they're starting to add to that. I'm sure they're going to be doing a big sell-off with a whole bunch of other pieces to try to add draft picks, especially in 2025, where they already have 2 firsts. They now also have 3 second-round picks in 2026. So this was a deal where, I felt really good about it. The reaction in the league was very positive for me, not so much for the other guy. But this is a situation where, it's important to know the status of your team. And we're going to talk about that a lot on this episode because there's a few different trades where recognizing when you need to rebuild is a critical skill in Dynasty because everyone wants to win all the time. It's why we play. It's more fun when you're winning. You want to win your money prizes in your leagues, get those bragging rights, all that. But when your league is hovering in the middle of the pack or worse, the worst place to be in fantasy is stuck in the middle. You either want to be contending for the top 3, making the playoffs, making a run, have a chance at a championship, or you want to be, one of the bottom 3 teams where, you have a shot at some elite talent in your rookie draft. But when you're stuck in that 4 through 7 range, that's not a great spot to be, particularly if you're in that 5 and 6 range. Because at least, if you're picking 7th in your rookie draft in a standard 12-team league, it does mean that you just made the playoffs. And once you get in, anything can happen. That's how fantasy football is. All you got to do is get in. But if you're missing and you're still not getting a top, 2 or 3 pick, that's a rough place to be. So I think, he might have been able to get a little bit more. I'm a little bit stingy when it comes to picks, so I don't know, what it would have looked like. But this was something that my team really needed. I had Dak Prescott as my only other quarterback on my roster on a team that is championship ready. I've Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Travis Kelce, a couple strong running backs. Saquon Barkley is my top guy there. So I'd a lot of depth, good receivers, just a strong roster all the way around, but I was really weak at quarterback outside of Dak. I had nobody else to plug in at my super flex position. So this gives me a high-end elite talent. And for the other guy, I sent a lot of draft capital. Some players in the league were surprised that there was not another first involved. But 201 in a strong draft class, along with some future picks. So it's always worth a shot. It's a perfect example of, you never know what somebody will accept until, you talk about it. You send that person a message on Sleeper and say, hey, are you interested in moving this player? What would it take? And going from there and just, firing off some offers back and forth. That offer was actually sent to me after he had been trying to move Hurts to a few other teams and wasn't really getting the type of package that he was looking for. So that's the other thing too. You have to know your league. If you look on a trade calculator or, you think you should be getting a little bit more, but nobody in your league is willing to, part with the type of assets that you think you should be getting, you can either hold, which is always generally a good strategy, especially with a young quarterback. But, either that or you go out and you find the best possible deal that you can if it's something that you really feel strongly about, where you need to make a move. So that's the first of our big quarterback trades here. But, Jalen Hurts, I think all these trades are within about the last 2 weeks or so. And this was just a situation where I needed that final piece for my starting lineup, and the other player really needed to restock on the draft capital and push to start a full rebuild as he goes into next season. Now, next up, trade 3. And again, that's trade number 2 is the only trade that involves me here today. So I enjoy talking about other people's trades more than mine. So this will be fun as we go through, and we got some huge trades to talk about. So make sure you stay tuned. A lot of high-end draft picks getting moved, quarterbacks. So stay tuned. A couple of them are also by, the same teams involved. So stay tuned, especially if you're in any of my leagues. One of your trades might be talked about here today. So, and we'll start with this one from my home main Dynasty league. And this was a pretty big trade. One of the first big ones of this league's off season that happened about a week ago. And going to one contending team is the 106, the 307, and Marvin Mims. And then headed the other way was Aaron Rodgers, Sam Howell, Hollywood Brown, and Tajay Spears. So kind of an interesting deal. We're going to see a couple of trades here where it's, picks for players or player for player, but this is something where it's a bit of a mix where you have the headlining piece in the return for those 4 players is the 106. I think that's probably the highest value asset in this deal, which is another good tip. I generally, and this isn't true in all cases, but generally speaking, it is always nice when you are receiving the most valuable asset in a trade. It's always kind of why in redraft, doing a 2-for-1 is a nice way to go in a redraft format where, you're just playing for 1 year. But this is a little bit different. I do prefer the 106 side of this trade. That team is a contending team that has actually missed the playoffs the last couple of seasons, but does have a very good roster, really just had a lot of injuries, and they had some quarterback depth, so they traded away Rodgers and Howell, who had just been traded to Seattle, and he has Joe Burrow and Deshaun Watson on his roster, and he had no draft picks. So this was a situation where, he was able to unload some talent that was affected by some various free agency moves. A couple of these players in particular that we talked about on last week's episode. So make sure you go and listen to that. But moving on from Spears after Tony Pollard signed with Tennessee, Hollywood Brown gets a 1-year deal with Kansas City. Probably is the peak of his value. Aaron Rodgers, will start for this other team, and Sam Howell provides some depth at the quarterback position. We'll see. I don't think he's going to challenge Geno Smith, but crazier things have happened. And so I really like this for the team that got the 106 because I think that's a really good spot in this draft. It's not a team that has any particular need. I prefer not to draft for need. I think going for talent is always the best way to go in your rookie draft. So there'll be plenty of solid options there at 106. And getting Marvin Mims is a pretty sneaky part of this deal as well. Probably going to be the number 2 receiver in Denver. So not only do you get the best asset in this deal, but getting Marvin Mims I think is a nice little piece. Going the other way, this is a team that is a little bit more of a rebuilding team, but I think is trying to not fall into the full-blown rebuild. I think they're kind of treading water a little bit, trying to find their way from being just out of the playoffs to being just in. And so this is a move that certainly will help with that. You get a second quarterback. Actually, it's probably going to be your QB1 because this team is pretty thin at quarterback. They have Derek Carr, Mac Jones. They were also thin at running back. So adding Aaron Rodgers, you get a starter, you get a young player in Howell that this manager probably hopes will take over the job at some point in Seattle. Tajay Spears, another young, solid running back, albeit stuck in a committee. And then Hollywood Brown. This is a situation where this manager probably is a pretty strong believer in Hollywood and is going to have a great opportunity in Kansas City. So, 3 of these 4 players are going to slot right into this manager's starting lineup. And if his goal is, sneaking into the playoffs and not competing for a top 2 or 3 pick, this is a move that will certainly make that more likely. He does still have 2 second-round picks and a couple fourths, and does have 2 2025 first-round picks. So it's not a full commit to contending, but it's not. I do think that keeping the 106 might have been the better play. Probably was the better play for this team. Add another young player, but again, when you miss the playoffs and you get hungry to bounce back, it's tough to commit to that rebuild. And so that's where understanding what you need to do, what you really need to acquire in order to be competitive. And so even if I disagree with this, type of move, this manager clearly recognized that he needed help at quarterback and running back, still had some draft capital, and, maybe just wasn't in love with the prospects at the top of this draft. But again, I do prefer the contender side of this and the 106. Next up, we have another big quarterback trade, one that, like the last side, I do feel like one side definitely got the better side of the deal. I think, through the first 2 deals, I think were, pretty solid for, all parties. You can make the case for trade number 3, but this one, I'm not sure that I see it. This was in a league that, 2 contending teams involved in this deal. One team acquired Deshaun Watson, and the other team acquired Kirk Cousins and 2 2025 second-round picks. So, again, that's Deshaun Watson on one side and Kirk Cousins and 2 2025 second-round picks on the other. Now, I very much prefer the Kirk Cousins side of this deal. Frankly, I would probably take Kirk Cousins over Deshaun Watson straight up. I am not a believer in Deshaun Watson. Even though there is the age difference between Watson and Cousins, and I'm sure that's what those 2 second-round picks are there to make up for, I just don't see Deshaun Watson returning to a high-level fantasy quarterback. I just don't see it. He's been brutal the last couple of years. He had the time away from football, on a relatively mediocre offense. In my eyes, it's not an offense that I really believe in there in Cleveland. So, I don't really understand giving up 2 second-round picks, with Cousins to get Watson. You could have done this straight up. You could have added some smaller draft picks. But these are 2 contending teams involved. And the team that acquired Deshaun Watson clearly thinks that he is a high-level fantasy player because he was the runner-up in this league last year. He has the best lineup in the league. No questions about it, really. He's got Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Mark Andrews, Joe Burrow is his other quarterback. He does lack depth. This is not a team that is loaded up on the bench, and he does not have any first or second-round picks in 2024. So this is a team that is all in, 100% committed to bringing home a title, and he felt that Deshaun Watson was a player that would put this lineup over the top to pair with Burrow and all those stud guys throughout the lineup. So can't fault that type of process, generally speaking. If you identify a player that you love, go out and be bold and get your guy. And that's clearly what happened in this case. I happen to disagree. I just don't see Watson in that same way. I think Cousins, now there's definitely some risk with the health, but as long as he comes back and can be, even relatively close to what he was the past couple of seasons in Atlanta, which is a very good situation, I do prefer the Cousins side, especially factoring in the 2 additional second-round picks, which to me felt like a bit of an overkill. The manager that acquired Cousins is also a contender. He has Jordan Love, Anthony Richardson at quarterback, and he has 2 first-round picks, 107 and 110, and he now has 3 25 second-round picks. So lots of depth there, and I like the direction for that team. Next up, we actually have all 4 of these next trades are all from the same league, league that I am the defending champion in, and so it's been fun to see some big-time moves happen here as everyone tries to catch up. And the first one is that we're going to talk about is not really a huge trade, but it does involve some really high-level assets. So first up, we have one side gets the 103 and the 108, and the other side gets the 105, 107, and 209. So in this trade, the team that got the 103 and 108, they moved up 2 spots from 5 to 3, and then they moved back 1 spot from 7 to 8, and they gave up the 209 to do it. Now, it's also important for context in this trade, the team that acquired the 5, 7, and second-round pick also owns the 104. So they had the 103, 104, 108, and now they have 104, 105, 107 after this trade. And they added that second-round pick. The team that acquired the 103 and 108 also has the 102. So this was a situation where, the team picking second, I think, probably has their eyes set on Marvin Harrison, but they do have a need at quarterback. So this is a situation where, it's a young team, got a lot of good, players that are on the younger end and on the rise. And this manager is looking for, a quarterback, I would assume. You want to pair a quarterback, whether it's Jaden Daniels, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, to go with Marvin Harrison. I think that's a pretty safe bet. And I think it's a great move. This is something where it doesn't change, a whole lot. This type of move, you're just moving around a couple spots. But if you're the team that acquires the 103, you are guaranteed to get your guys, your pick of the quarterbacks at the 103 position. And the team that's picking at 105 was a rebuilding team that is now turning into a contender based on a trade that we're going to talk about in a minute. And, they are set at quarterback. So this was something where, they identified, hey, the team picking behind me, has a need for a quarterback. I don't. This manager in particular has Kyler Murray, Trevor Lawrence, and Dak Prescott. So they're probably looking at other positions in the draft, wide receiver, tight end, and they were able to acquire an additional second-round pick and move up from 8 to 7, which, depending on how you view your tiers, is a nice little break. So, good move for both sides. The team that acquired the 5, 7, and second-round pick, we just mentioned, rebuilder turning into a contender, has a bunch of other draft capital still, including the fourth pick and the 5th pick, a couple extra seconds. So, and at the time of this trade, they also had the 109. This was frankly a pretty good deal for both sides. I think both teams come out nicely from this, and this was an example of some good creative thinking to come up with a deal where both sides can benefit and get what their teams need. Now, following that trade up, we have the monster trade of the day, the biggest one probably that we'll talk about on this show. And frankly, it's a trade that I think is pretty rare, that we don't see very often, this type of move. We see it broken up into a bunch of smaller trades because it is rare that you see a player with enough draft capital to pull off this type of move. But in this deal, the player that we just talked about before, the manager that acquired the 105, 107, and the second round pick, this time unloaded a whole bunch of draft capital to acquire some high-end but aging veterans. So in this deal, side number one received the 107, the 109, the 208, the 209, 312, 407, and 409. So that's 7 draft picks. The team that acquired those 7 draft picks was the reigning runner-up in this league. Strong team, but hitting the age cliff. Probably saw the writing on the wall and decided that rather than take one more year and hope things held up like they did last season, that this was a good time to pivot towards a rebuild. This will certainly speed up that process. Instead of a 2, 3, even 4-year type of rebuild, this is probably something that could be done in 2 years now. Maybe even 1, depending on, if you hit on all these draft picks. You never know how things can go. But he had 0 picks in this draft. So this was a situation where he wanted to unload some veterans and get as many draft picks as he could to accelerate that rebuild. He's still left with Jordan Addison, Jared Goff, Isaiah Pacheco. Those are probably his 3 main building blocks moving forward. He still has some talent left to trade. Amari Cooper, Tyler Lockett. So he has some pieces still to move around with. And depending on how the draft goes, if he wants to try to contend still, he certainly could. But committing to the rebuild and trying to acquire some 2025 picks with, some of those more expendable veterans that he does have left. I think Amari Cooper, for example, is a great example of that. That's certainly an option as well. So on the other side of the deal, though, the players that this team gave up, Travis Kelce, Devontae Adams, Alvin Kamara, David Montgomery, and DeAndre Swift. So 5 very talented, big-name players. And all 5 of these players are going to start for the team that they went to. Again, this is the same manager that has the 104 and the 105 and had just made the swap in the previous trade. So this was his big move to become a contender. So those 5 players, Kelce, Adams, Kamara, Montgomery, and Swift, are going to be added to a lineup that includes, we mentioned the trio at quarterbacks that this manager has with Murray, Prescott, and Lawrence. He's got Chris Olave, Mark Andrews. But it was a team that really lacked running back depth. And so this trade, clearly went out and solved that problem. Whether these players, what their careers will look like after, this upcoming season or 2 years from now, it's hard to say. Kamara in particular might be hitting that age cliff a little bit sooner. But I think this is probably a trio that you're going to get 2 solid years out of at the running back position. Travis Kelce, still an elite player as long as he continues to play. There's always some risk that, he might decide to retire, but as long as he's still on the field, he's going to be a top 2, top 3 fantasy tight end. And Devontae Adams, despite atrocious quarterback play, still a very solid fantasy asset despite the age. Again, approaching that age cliff, maybe 1 year left, maybe 2, hard to say. But this was a bold move that will turn this team from, a basement dweller to a strong contender. So, still lacking a little bit of depth, but still has plenty of draft capital. He's going to add players at 104 and 105. Still has a couple second round picks, a couple late round picks as well, and is loaded for the 2025 draft. So, really like what that manager has been able to do with his team and the talent. I don't know if I love giving up the 107 in this deal. I think maybe trying to keep that 107 and maybe leaving somebody like Travis Kelce out of the deal would have been a nice move. But again, if you're the other team, I don't know that you do this deal without the 107 in this trade, because that's obviously the 107 and 109 are the 2 big prizes coming back. So overall, it's hard to argue with either side of this type of trade. One team recognized that, they at best had 1 season left of, being able to compete and decided to, jump the gun and get a lot of draft capital in a draft class that is, regarded as being a deep one. And the other team, after a couple seasons of, being at the bottom of the standings, decided that now was the time to make a move and go for it. So overall, really like both sides of this deal. And again, it's rare that you see something come together like this. Usually it's going to be a smaller situation where, you're selling off these players one or two at a time. But, in this situation, it just worked out for both parties. Now, next up, we have a 1-for-1 trade, and it's James Cook for the 108, which is an interesting move. The team that sold the 108 they were also involved in one of the previous trades, trade 5. The team that acquired the 103 and the 108 and has the 102 decided to move the 108 for James Cook, identifying a young running back that they were excited about, wanted to add to their lineup. The other team that got the 108 is a contending team, very strong lineup. They had plenty of running back depth. They now have 2 late first-round picks, 108 and 111. And the manager that got James Cook, this was something where, they have the 102 and 103. They're going to add likely Harrison and a quarterback. But they were really thin at running back. So, this is a young team on the rise. They have some good depth at wide receiver, especially, if we assume that Marvin Harrison Jr. is added to this roster. James Cook is going to get paired with Devon Achane, and it's, hard to argue with that strategy. I think that the 108 side does get the better end of the deal. I don't love James Cook. I think, there was potential maybe to get somebody a little bit stronger for that pick, considering that's where a lot of people view a tier break in the rookie class. Depending on your thoughts on Brian Thomas or J.J. McCarthy, it could be after 7, could be after 8, could be after 9. I currently see it probably as 108 being the last pick in that tier, but it will depend on where Brian Thomas Jr. goes in the draft. If he goes top 15, that tier might extend out to 9. But overall, I think pretty good move for the contending team that got the 108. Gives them some flexibility in the draft. They have running back depth led by Breece Hall. They have some other pieces, not necessarily any second, star young running back, but depth, good startable depth players, that aren't going to wow you, but we mentioned, they're guys like Najee Harris, Chuba Hubbard, and there's some draft capital there to, add some different pieces. So overall, pretty good move. I can understand it from both sides. Ty Chandler, another one that is a running back on that roster as well with Raheem Mostert. So, depth across the board, and the team that had the 108 had some extra draft capital and decided to go out and, accelerate their rebuild with a piece that they feel like will, be with them for several years. So I prefer the 108, but again, this is an example of an aggressive, bold move to go get, a guy that, this manager believes in. Now, our last trade of the day is a very small one. It's, the type of move that, might ultimately not mean anything for either team, but I love these types of moves where they're just, small little trades where you can see that both managers, were really thinking about, the best ways to fill out depth on their roster and move off of pieces that, don't really do anything for them. So in this situation, we have Jake Browning being traded straight up for Xavier Hutchinson, wide receiver of the Texans. So, backup quarterback is going to go to, Jake Browning is going to go to the team with Joe Burrow. So there's a contending team. They have Joe Burrow. They have a lot of depth at wide receiver. And Xavier Hutchinson is going to go also to a contending team, but one that really lacks depth. It doesn't have a lot of young pieces. And they already have a handful of other backup quarterbacks. So, they weren't protecting themselves by keeping Jake Browning because they weren't the Joe Burrow manager. They had some other players at the quarterback position that, should injuries occur, would be able to step in. But, Xavier Hutchinson, a rookie, probably isn't going to do a whole lot in the league, but it's not like Jake Browning is going to turn into some starting quarterback that, does a whole lot either. So, it's a lottery ticket. It's a chance on a guy that had a couple nice games at the end of the season. CJ Stroud is there, and, certainly acquiring players attached to young star quarterbacks is always good strategy. So, I like it for both sides. I think it makes a ton of sense. And I think it's a good move all around. And so this is something where, you looking at your leagues can, hey, go take a look at what you have on your bench that, might be considered, one of those bottom, 5 to 8 players, guys that are not going to start for you, but you don't really want to cut either. And, just go take a look and see, hey, could I swap this player for someone else, positionally that maybe fits better for my team or can work as a handcuff? Or, hey, I have a couple solid starting quarterbacks, but, I should acquire a backup just in case, gives you an extra chance at, somebody that you can plug in during a bye week instead of having to, play the game on waivers. So, all in all, like this move for both parties. So that's going to do it for today's episode. So we're just some trade review, talking about, some different strategies, seeing how teams across multiple leagues, have been making moves. Hopefully this can give you some ideas to be creative in your leagues, figure out what players you might want to target, some types of moves you can make, whether you're a contender or a rebuilder, and, you can go forward from there. So thank you all for tuning in. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, we'll be starting our position previews for the rookies next week. So I think we're going to start with running backs. Pretty crowded position, but I don't have that locked down for sure yet. But stay tuned. We have some big shows in the works, and then we will be attending the NFL draft in person, as it is here in Detroit. I'm based in Michigan, so very excited for that, and we'll have a show right after the draft where we talk about the experience and give you some rookie rankings and reflections on how things shake out from draft night. So stay tuned for that. I appreciate you all for listening in. Follow the show on whatever platform you're listening to right now, and go find us on Twitter at Dynasty War Room. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you all next week.